Hi, class. For this lecture, we are going to be looking at religion and belief systems. So when it comes to defining religion, it's kind of difficult. The most simplest version of a definition we have is from anthropologist E.B. Tyler, and he simply defines religion as a belief in the supernatural. So when we look across cultures and across the globe, we see that everybody, all cultures have some type of belief system that forms the basis of their social interactions, their political interactions, the way that they go about interacting with their environment, interacting with other species in the environment, and just, basically how they are human and how they go about living life. So, in many ways, not all cultures have religion, because I think a lot of the time when we think about religion, we put it in a very Western concept and we think of more like organized religion. We think of Christianity, Catholicism, we think about Islam, those are kind of organized religions and kind of I can't think of how you say East, ecclesiastical cults. Oh, I have to see the word ecclesiastical. I think that's how you say it. Cults is actually what those types of organized religions are. We'll get to that in a little bit later. But I think that a lot of cultures, what they have, they wouldn't define it as religion because, once again, we're coming from that Western perspective, and in their own perspective, they don't have a religion because a lot of times, too, I think religion indicates the worshiping of whatever that supernatural thing is, and I think the main reason that we even have belief systems that are what we consider supernatural, be it, primitive, say like the Neanderthals from thousands of years ago, their religion and belief systems that we have archaeological evidence of, to organized religions. The reason we have belief systems is because of death. Death is the great unknown. So I mean, in many ways, that's that supernatural force. It's just, the whatever is beyond this world. And it seems apparent when we look across cultures and across time and different mythos and folklore, we see, the idea that what we believe to be reality and conscious waking reality for the most part, that, there are a lot of different interpretations on that, and that all cultures have a belief in some other kind of consciousness and other types of realities. And so, that's where our religion comes into helping us make sense of the world that we live in. And it also helps us to, solve problems in many ways. And I think probably when we look at larger scales, religion seems to create more problems. So I think it's more in that individual and probably smaller communal groups that we really see more of that problem solving. And I think, once again, across the board, when we look at other belief systems, we see that there's always some form of beliefs that dictate to the members of that culture how they're going to be, how they're going to behave to others, and basically how they're going to be accountable and responsible for their decisions in life. And and then that's when we start getting into morality. And so we have to, is morality independent of religion? I would argue in many ways yes, because of what I just said. Not all cultures have what I think we would say, religion, when we think of it in probably the mainstream sense. And defining religion has problems. And then, one of the disagreements has to do with, once again, this idea of supernatural. So, this religious and non religious phenomenon, a lot of times, religious phenomenon, it's not something that is of the natural, just everyday waking consciousness reality, right? It's always something that's different. And in eco psychology, transpersonal psychology, we say, we have waking consciousness. We know from Freud and Jung that we have our unconscious, we have the subconscious, and then we also have, these religious experience. So we have this kind of transpersonal states of consciousness, something like self-actualization that humanistic psychologist Abraham Maslow talks about, or even like with the Buddhists and when they talk about ideas of enlightenment. All of those are different states of consciousness. And so a lot of times a religious experience falls into that transpersonal, extraordinary kind of experience of just experience, I don't really know how you break it down further than that, like a famous one. I can't remember. It's probably been within the last, if not the 80s, it was the 90s. Where it was down in South America, and it's like this whole group of people witnessed, I believe it was a statue of the Virgin Mary, and it was like she was crying bloody tears, and that I think that's just the only one that's coming to mind. But I mean, there are a lot of those stories that you hear, and a lot of them involve that idea of like seeing the image of Christ on the cross, and maybe he's bleeding or crying, or seeing this image of the Virgin Mary, or like I said, seeing her statue doing something that statues shouldn't be doing, or people have these experiences of seeing what they would consider angels. People have experiences of what they consider demons. I mean, people have experiences that have nothing to do with Christianity. We can get into old European ancient folklore and culture, and a lot of things that they would consider supernatural. They equated those to nature spirits. So these beings that lived out in nature, and they were a part of nature, but separate from nature. We would call them fairies nowadays. And even then it wasn't demons. They had things like goblins and pukas and bogarts, and then when you come and you look at the Native Americans, and they have some of them have these different ideas, and Lakota specifically, they have these ideas in nature spirits. So kind of similar to what the ancient Europeans, kind of more Celtic, what we consider pagan type. It's kind of the neo-paganism now, in this 21st century. They've altered that a lot of that mainstream kind of witchy stuff you see. But the indigenous aspects of those, it was really based on this relationship and just nature, and understanding the environment you lived in. And so with the Lakota, they have they have similar beliefs because they believe in nature spirits, and they kind of control the weather, and that was always a big thing of if you did something bad, and maybe you had this like hailstorm and it destroyed your crop, then that was some kind of moral character flaw, or some kind of like a social injustice that you committed. And even if we look at say like the Greeks and their belief system, and they had Olympus and all the different gods, kind of their hierarchy of the different gods. And a lot of times we see with them this kind of personification of like human personality and human emotions. And so it goes back to that idea, is that we create these religions, we create these other beings, and maybe they exist. I'm not saying that they don't. I believe anything is possible, right? There are definitely too many people across the world and throughout time that have believed in all these different things, and who am I to tell them they're wrong? But once again, it's that comfort, though, because we can't live. Life is stressful and chaotic enough as it is, and with modern society, we've really thrown a wrench in that cog, right? Because we've added this whole new level of stress that stress is supposed to be something that's natural, and because it is kind of a survival thing. But a lot of the modern amenities and technologies we have created added this kind of a maladaptive stress, and we see that come out with mental disorders. And one out of every 4 or 5 people in the United States have some type of mental illness, even physical illnesses, things like obesity, things like a bad heart, heart problems, all of that, cardiovascular problems, all of that comes down to how we go about living our lives, and how we go about handling the stress in our lives. And so, many people turn to religion for that. And so, it doesn't really matter if you believe in the idea of supernatural or not. There have been enough people put power into that once again, that comfort thing. I guess that's the only thing I'm arguing about religion, is that I do believe that it does provide people with comfort, so that in many ways we don't go crazier than we already are, right? And then one of the challenges too with studying belief systems across cultures and across time spans is that many cultures, they rely on that oral tradition. They don't have writing, is what I'm trying to say. They don't have writing that denotes what exactly their beliefs mean. It's kind of this, it was passed down from our grandparents, and this is kind of what we believe and how we do it. And then even at that, I would argue that even in our Western society, the greatest invention, or probably, yeah, I'd say, our first greatest invention was fire. And then probably the second one was coming up with the Gutenberg press, so that we could actually educate people and people could learn to read. That was pretty ingenious and innovative, and, really changed culture. And that's more for my history class. But my point there is that even with our tradition of written word and text, we still have more, I think, of an oral tradition. I think back, my dad was a chaplain's assistant in the military, and so even though we I could read the Bible at a very young age, and we would read and stuff like that. I still feel like a lot of it was kind of that storytelling aspect, that oral tradition, if that makes any sense for you guys. So looking at some of those functions of religion, we've talked about the life after death. Oh, I didn't talk about that. So yeah, so a lot of times too, when it comes to a ritual, so these supernatural forces, these gods, these nature spirits, these other beings that come in and mess stuff up for human beings. And a lot of times our belief system provides us with rituals that help to appease them. And it's see something as, once again, something as simple as doing some kind of ritual to ensure your crop grows, because that's an important, if we don't have food, if we can't sustain ourselves, then we can't survive. And then if we can't survive, all the rest of this is for naught, right? So we do these types of rituals, and rituals, I would say, would be it's a set of activities, be those activities, dancing, singing, quiet meditation. It's some kind of activity that you do with your community that is going to somehow make you perceive that you have control of your environment. So you would do something to, appease the crops, make sure your animals stay healthy, we can, go with the mainstream paganism type stuff. You're gonna, do a ritual to manifest money, get a better job, find your lover, all of those different types of things, are all are all aspects of, or not aspects, but they're all different types of rituals. And that's what appeasing supernatural forces, it comes down to. It's a very psychological idea. It comes down to, as human beings, we have to be in control, or we at least have to feel like we're in control, because, once again, we don't really know what life is. We don't know what death is. We just, we know we're here, and we know we're having the experiences that we're having. And, to be okay with that, we have these belief systems, and we have these rituals. And then, of course, once again, because death being that great unknown, we also have these ideas of a soul. That comes into the different parts of your consciousness. You have your consciousness, waking consciousness, you have your subconsciousness, and then, the majority of our behavior, when Freud first came up with those three parts of our mind, psyche, as he called it, the subconscious is kind of like a mental waiting room. It's not where all the dark stuff that we need to work on lies. That's way, way down in our unconscious, and our unconscious is infinite. There's so much that goes on in there that, we're not aware of all of it. And so Freud believed that, Sigmund Freud, father of psychology, psychoanalysis, he believed that the majority of our behaviors is down in our unconsciousness. So therefore, in many ways, he was kind of saying that as humans, we're kind of crazy and chaotic, and not really in control of our anything really. And the way that we find that balance is with these kind of things. We set up society, so we have these rules of how to behave and engage. We have these belief systems that, give us some accountability and responsibility for our actions. And then, we have this, many cultures believe in this idea of the soul, that, we, even though we're here in what we call physical reality in these physical bodies, they're still not truly who we are. There's something else that makes us up. And even, beyond those different parts of consciousness in our minds, there's still something else. So, very interesting. And then when it comes into, so like I said, when it comes into looking at this idea of belief systems, and we are kind of in many ways keeping it based on E.B. Tyler simplification of that belief in the supernatural, because, you really can't separate religion from that. Everyone involves some kind of manipulation of something beyond us, beyond this reality, that as a way to, like just there, as a way to help us control human activities and natural events. Sorry about that, guys. I'm sitting outside. Dirt or something in my eye. And so when it looks, so when we think about magic, I'm sure, we probably think of a Cinderella, bippity boppity boo, right? Abracadabra. And that is a form of magic. Some people just, that actually is a form of magic that's goes way back in time to, oh gosh, I can't even remember the beginnings of it off the top of my head. But just these old ideas that your words, that we have power with our words and what we say, and that by what we say and how we feel and how we think, that all that in many ways creates our reality. So, what you send out into the world sends back to you. And, when we think of it as magic, we're like, that sounds so silly, primitive people. We don't do that. But at the same time, when you looked at organized religion, well, yes, they very much do imitative and contagious magic, and just simple, just spoken magic too. That's what prayer is. And I'm certainly not knocking the power of prayer. There are many psychological studies and medical studies that show us that just power of suggestion alone can have a pretty amazing results when it comes to physical health. I mean, they've done studies to show that if someone is sick in the hospital, even, independent of knowing that somebody is praying about them, they have gotten better. I find that a little far-fetched. I find it more that if you think it, you believe it, the power of positive thinking, which is the same with the opposite. If you're negative all the time, you're going to have negative things happen to you all the time. That's all magic, but these words have so many emotional and just social and political connotations to them, because when we look at history and things like the Salem witch trials, and even before the Salem witch trials, those things were going on in Europe, and things like the Spanish Inquisition. This was kind of all this battle of like organized religion versus like these other types of religion that were more woo woo. We would call it more the pagan, heathen, you know, heathens. If you're not with us, you're worshiping Satan type of stuff. But when we break it down and look at it, we see there aren't really that many differences. It's just how we choose to present the belief system. But all belief systems, all religion has this magical element to it, regardless of if we use that actual term of magic or not. And I was going to say that contagious magic too. So like the power of suggestion could be a form of that. It also makes me think about like things like revivals, or just like those types of churches where they speak in tongues, or even we'll take it across the globe. You look at some of those festivals that they do in Islam, or even some of the Jewish stuff. But Islam is specifically, they do like these mass animal sacrifices, and it's kind of brutal to watch. And then maybe you go jump down to the continent of Africa, and you look at some of the rituals that they do down there, and from our outsiders' perspective, without a clear understanding of the history, the culture, and that true um, image perspective, it seems, very probably flamboyant and over the top and just crazy and weird to us. But then, I've been in many different churches, and there are some that have a lot of religious fervor, sorry, that goes on, that I would say is pretty contagious. And so, in saying that, at the same time, we do see that belief systems are they can all be used for bad too, right? Islam, Christianity. There's a lot of history of conflict and bloodshed in those religions. I just gave some examples of that. The Spanish Inquisition is a good example. Um, some of the just contact and settlement, and missionaries coming from Europe to places like South America, or even just the American Southwest. A lot of those Indian cultures, they were, it was like, if you don't submit and become, Catholic Christian, we're gonna kill you and burn your house down and kill your wife, and that happened a lot when I did archaeology out in Texas, and traveled through Texas at a different time too. And there are a lot of Spanish missions out there, and a lot of them have horror stories attached to them. It's interesting, it's sad, at the same time, which does that not sum up human nature, right? We're interesting and disgusting all rolled into this one big package. And so we see that reflected in our belief systems, because we perform these beliefs in the supernatural to help us have some kind of control over life, right? I presented that idea already. So we see the opposite side of that, to where we see that very probably egoic, narcissistic side of it when we get to things like sorcery and witchcraft. This is where, you want to have so much control over your environment and others that you are causing harm to them. So I would say that when it comes to religions and we break them down, sorcery, witchcraft, those are different types of religions. They are, and they appeal more to those personalities that are a little more on that grotesque side of being human, right? Because it comes down to that idea of harm. Most religions, most belief systems, the idea that forms their basis is that as human beings, we're here because we work together and we're supposed to work together. So, do no harm to others is kind of like that number one commandment for everybody. And so then when you get into these more heinous types of belief systems, once again, we just see the extremes of human nature. So you can have belief systems that comfort and help, or we can have belief systems that are twisted in a way that they comfort by harming others. And that's real psychological there. And I don't want to get too much into that. And so, in looking at things like witchcraft and sorcery, we know history, media, just even mainstream social ideology has taken these ideas of if you're not with us, you're against us. So pretty much anybody that wasn't from the European, predominant Christian religion, which is kind of funny because it's more like Roman Catholic, which started down in the Mediterranean, right? But it was like, if you weren't with us, you were against us. And if you didn't, worship our God, and then you were worshiping his and antithesis, right? His antagonist, Satan. And so a lot of different belief systems have been relegated into this kind of pagan, Wiccan, Satanism kind of bag, I guess we can say. And once again, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and be like, those kind of things don't exist, because they do. And within all of them, there are extremes. There are some versions of Satanism that, I mean, it's literally just like going to a Christian church, but it's like everywhere you say like glory to God or you'd say amen, they say hell Satan. It was kind of weird, funny. And quick story, but back when I was probably about 13 or 14, before my dad retired, one of the last services he set up, so we're talking about back in the mid to late 90s at this point, the military was getting a little more open, and so at the place we were at in Alabama, it was a place called Fort McClellan that he was stationed at. They started having these different types of services, so he had to go and set up for some kind of Wiccan services, and he had to go do one for a satanic mass. And I remember he was kind of nervous because he had the are they gonna be killing some virgin or killing animals, what is going to happen at this satanic mass, like all the fear, all the stereotypes of what goes along with that. And I was so mad because I would go and help him set up different stuff all the time. And that was one that he didn't want me to go, wasn't allowed to go. Guess he probably thought I would be the one I would be the virgin they would sacrifice. Sorry. Like, he came back and then, I was so mad because I didn't get to go, and he set up one for a weekend too, and I wanted to go see that, and I wasn't allowed to go to that one either. But it was like he came back and he was like, it was nothing. None of that happened. They had their like Satan Bible, and like I said, he's like everywhere you're supposed to be like amen or say the Lord or God. It was like Satan, and makes me think of that show too, guys. I can't even remember the name of it. It was on Adult Swim. It was a heavy metal show. They were like a band and they were heavy metal. There's one where they go and try out the different religions. It's pretty funny. I wish I could remember. But anyway, but my point is that when it comes to religion, once again, we did, it's such a loaded word because of these different connotations, these emotional attachments, these biases that we have to it. And that's really what creates the most problems there. And we can't just all seem to be okay with disagreeing and still getting along. That has a whole set of problems in itself, right? Because not everything is black and white in that way. And so here is just a picture of a typical Wiccan festival. You know, when it comes to Wicca pagans, they're really into the idea of kind of like worshiping nature. Really, you know, that's a big part of what I'd say organized religion versus a lot of other types of belief systems, even though, you know, there's some kind of ritual aspect involved that is appeasing the supernatural forces. You know, when you start getting into those organized religions, you see more of that actual worshiping of those supernatural forces. And for most people of Wicca, which I would say is probably an organized religion at this point too, that worship comes in for, like I said, of just worshiping kind of the natural elements in themselves. And then, you know, there's a big ritual aspect and observing things like the solstices, because those might mark transitions in the year, things of that nature. All right. So, like we said, so as far as religion goes, you know, we have it. It provides us with comfort. It provides us with, you know, those guidelines for how to engage with others. And like I said, for the most part, I would say more religions than not have the idea of do no harm, because, you know, it's all about that togetherness and building that community solidarity. You know, it's about, you know, reducing stress and frustrations in our life. And then, you know, psychologically, you know, it helps us emotionally. Once again, you know, something like the power of prayer, something like meditation, you know, we do know that that helps reduce anxiety, helps, you know, with depression. And then, you know, we have countless studies that show us that it also has physiological effects. So, you know, it can, you know, we see after someone meditates, it increases those feel good neurotransmitters and other like hormones and chemicals in our bodies. It reduces our blood pressure, you know, helps our heart rate slow down. You know, it can help with indigestion. You know, the same with prayer. Same thing there. Same with you know, some little tribe on the continent of Africa that is doing a ritual to you know, appease the ancestors. You know, there are a lot of um, cultures that we call ancestor cults, because they believe, you know, their belief in the afterlife is that it's right here with us, basically. And so, you know, it's natural for them to walk around and to see what we would call ghosts. You know, they, of course, they call it their ancestors, the people that came before them and have passed on. And, you know, they like live and work with them on a daily basis. You know, once again, there are many Native Americans, the Lakota. See, I work with the Lakota a lot. You know, they have ideas that when someone first passes, you know, there's like this mourning period and the person's still there with you. And you know, it's perfectly normal to them, you know, because it's that emotional and cognitive functions that it's providing for those people. And so when it comes to classifying religion, I like this idea of Anthony Wallace that really when it comes to religions, they're all very cultic, you know, because they have their own prescribed set of beliefs, their own practices, their own rituals, and there is very much the idea of in group and out groups. And once again, we see the extreme of human nature exemplified in that cultic idea of religion too, because of, you know, Jim Jones, um, Waco, Texas. You know, there are some other examples of that too. You know, can we really say that religion in any form is not brainwashing? I'll leave it at that. Think about that for a minute. So when it comes to religious organization, Wallace says that we have four types. We have the individualistic, shamanistic, communal, and oh man, now that I see it, I still can't say it. Ecclesiastical cults. Haha, that's how you say it. Ecclesiastical cults. Cults. I can't say that. So individualist cults, we say these are the most simplest form of religion, and basically these are these are groups where they put it up into the individual's hands. You know, they're still working as a community, but for the most part, you know, learning your belief systems is kind of up to you. So we see that with the Plains Indians, with the Vision Quest. That's you know, that's all about a person establishing their place in society. You know, they figure out who they are, what their role is, and what they're supposed to do. And that's the most simplest way I can say that. Shamanistic cult, so that was where you would have those individuals doing their own thing, but then they have somebody kind of overseeing or kind of organizing them. So maybe at specific times of the year, you know, everybody, instead of going off and doing their own individual things, everybody needs to come together and have one big vision quest to help guide the whole group. That's something that we see with a lot of the Plains Indians too, with peyotes. They call them peyote cults. And they actually, I think it was in 1994, the official peyote church. It was the, I want to say it was maybe the, I want to say it was the Navajo that were the ones to get that established, but I could be wrong on that. It's one of the southwest Indian groups there, kind of southwest and Mexico, that whole geographic area there. But my point is that you know, they these peyote cults, peyote, you know, a lot of other cultures, when they use these types of hallucinogenic drugs that you know, we since the 60s have been using, you know, used just for recreational and kind of leisure. You know, I don't think that a lot of kids take acid because they're trying to have some kind of like religious experience, right? You know, it's kind of, it's usually a misguided kind of, you know, that's why they do, you know, why do we do any kind of drugs or anything? You know, it's not about learning about yourself or having this, you know, type of religious, emotional, communal experiences. And so with this peyote cult, they do like a maybe twice a year or something, you know, specific times of the year, they'll all get together and they'll have the shaman, and they basically, they go on this kind of communal trip together, and even children as young as 2 years old are allowed to participate. And you know, and it's because it's very guided. In fact, for our Western culture, psychologists recommend that if you're going to do any kind of hallucinogenic type of drug, if you really, really want to have that experience, I'm not advocating this, guys, but I'm just telling you, psychologists say that it's best to do it, but with to have somebody there pretty much babysitting you, so somebody who's not, you know, having the same experience as you, because you need somebody to bring you back, talk you back. And when LSD first came out, it was actually invented for headaches and abnormal vaginal bleeding. That's what the pharmacist came up with when they sent it to the psychiatrists and psychologists. That's what they told him. And at the same time, too, it was being touted as in, you psychiatrists take some of this to experience what your patient is going through, so that you kind of get in that psychotic mindset, and you have more understanding for helping them therapeutically. And then at the same time, they, you know, back in the like 70s, they were giving it to patients for them to have these experiences, just kind of just for that, to explore this idea of psychosis, and you know, how and what that means to behavior. So it's really, really interesting. The history of psychoactive drugs is pretty interesting there. So with these shamans, they do, you know, they do that with peyote coats, and there's the you go deeper down the Americas into the South America, down in the Amazon, and you've got the is it ayahuasca that people will do, and that's a big thing. Like celebrities and rich people are running down to South America to have these ayahuasca experiences. And Wade Davis is a cultural anthropologist. He's great if you guys have never listened to him, but he has some of those experiences and talks about that. So the shaman, you know, it's just that that kind of that mediator, that guide. And we say shaman because it indicates somebody who is trained in communicating with the spirit world. And the last point on shamans is that it's very interesting that we often equate that more with cultures like Native Americans or down in South America or say on the African continent, but the actual shaman, an idea that came from the indigenous groups of Russia. Their name is failing me, of course, my old brain, but I've always found that interesting that that's where that term originally came from. And so, if anybody really has a true shamanic culture, it would only be those who are descendants of that original Russian group. But anyway, that's my own thesis for another research paper another day on there. And with these communal cults, we really see this idea of community rituals, to where not necessarily somebody in charge, or sometimes like with the Maasai, it's not just one person that is used as a religious leader. It's kind of like all the elders, so it's like a group of elders, and it's usually the elder men. Specifically with the Maasai, they're a very patriarchal culture, and so all the elder men are considered kind of the leaders, and so they're the religious figures too, and so they're the ones in charge of organizing everybody to have these specific rituals to exemplify their belief systems. A lot of times we can break those rituals down into two types: rites of passage and rites of solidarity. So they have these rituals to build community between their among their group members, and then they have these rites of passages, which is pretty much where it's a transitioning. It's to help you, like it says, social status, and a lot of times it's puberty. It's when children transition from puberty to adulthood, because they're changing. That's developmental psychology. They're no longer children, they're now adults, and so that means that they have other social expectations, other social responsibilities that they now have to fulfill. And, to exemplify that, they have these rites of passage. A quinceanera would be a good example of that. Some of those cultures down in the Amazon jungle, they'll do things like they've got to be bitten by fire ants, and you're not allowed to cry out. You have things like circumcisions, clitorectomies, where they sew the woman shut and chop off her genital parts of her genitals. And then there are things like in South Asian country, not South Asian, excuse me, just Asian cultures. There used to be the foot binding thing. I mean, some of that was kind of a rite of passage thing. Some of that was, related to just social status of women. But my point is that different cultures have different ways that they celebrate this transition from puberty to adulthood. And then we have our ecclesiastical cult. I'm not going to get that right, huh? And this is, like I said, this is full blown organized religion. So, this is definitely Christianity, be it the Protestant vein of Christianity, be it the Catholic vein of Christianity. This is Islam, the different groups of Islam. This would be straight up Judaism, so Jewish cultures. And like I said, I would think that there's probably even a tree just fell, that probably even a lot of these neo-pagan groups have gotten to this status, because there are many of those pagan, especially out west like Colorado and stuff, where they have churches and they do services just like Christian churches and Catholic churches and things like that. So they have these priests and these mediators, and they meet at their regular times, and all those things that come along with organized religion. And then this is just a table that shows us the religious affiliation in the U.S. And I find this table a little deceiving because on first glance, it makes it look like Protestants and Catholics are the two predominant groups of religions in the United States. But then you look over at the percentages and you see, oh, wait a minute, it's actually not the case. It's evangelical Protestant, and then it's unaffiliated is the next largest group. I just find that very interesting that they set this up because it's very psychological how they did this. It's very manipulative there because we are, yeah, it's just manipulative. You look at that and you think, oh yeah, that's right, and then not until you look at the percentages that you're like, oh wait a minute, that's not a numerical order. And I can see why evangelical Protestants are the number one group. That all goes back to the Puritan tradition. Let me go back. Hold on. I wanted to see what. And then I find it interesting that Buddhists are only 7% because, other than Buddhists is, I believe the last statistic I just saw, that might have been from 2018. It's like they're leading as, they've at least surpassed Christianity. I don't know. I was trying to look at the Mormons and the Jehovah Witnesses too. I would think that they would have a higher percentage, but it's hard to tell. This is why I don't like statistics, because just looking at this table, you don't really know what went into making this. I mean, how many people did they survey? What were the results? And yeah, crazy stuff there. But anyway, so when it comes to our belief systems, as much as they seem stagnant because of traditions and rituals, they're actually just like culture. They're very dynamic, and a part of that we see through the way people adapt. Just like we adapt to our environments and adapt to everything else, our beliefs in the supernatural, have been adapted to. And we see that throughout different parts of the world. Say we're back during contact, we're heavily influenced by Catholicism. A lot of those places, they took those original ideas, and just through generational time and change, they've been they have merged and become something new. A lot of those places, they took those new beliefs that were being introduced and they mixed them with their old beliefs, so we had something new formed there. Things like hoodoo, that you see a lot in like the Caribbean cultures. That's a most of that is like a Catholicism with those indigenous belief systems mixed together. And then again, I think we see that in just any church you would go to. If in the South, there's Baptist church, and then the next block it's the Methodist church, and then maybe it's the Southern Baptist, it's the Latter Day Saints, whatever. But my point is that this 10th Street Baptist Church is going to be different from the 12th Street Baptist Church over there. Like, that's how much, that's how, even though we still have that continuity because they're using the same Bible, that change comes in the interpretation and the perspective of it. And so, we see that with even with the, like, Buddhism, you see there are different sects, there are different cults, and the way like the Vietnamese Buddhists, they don't necessarily believe exactly as like the Tibetan Buddhists. So like the Dalai Lama, a famous Vietnamese Buddhist, his name is Thich Nhat Hanh. Like, they have similar ideas, but there's still different perspectives, different ways to go about um, viewing and exemplifying those belief systems. And so, like I said, we see it everywhere. Even when we get those panethnic terms and we think like, oh, African tribalism, they all do rites of passage. It's like, well, no, when you break it down, the Maasai do it differently from this group over here, say the Simia, they do it differently from the people in Nubia, people who live in Kenya. And same with like Native Americans, you know, even though we may see similar rituals or similar ideologies, everybody adds their own spin to it. And then a lot of times when it comes to, you know, that change within religions, a lot of it is it's revitalizing. It's like, okay, you know, we need to change by going backwards. You know, you go backwards, and then you have those revitalization movements to where it's like, we're going to change this, you know, we're going to change our ideas of this so much that we're going to see these, you know, these profound changes within society. And a lot of times when we see those revitalization movements, it's always going to be under some type of duress. So, you know, change that would be, you know, like contact when you know, other cultures first came in contact with each other. You kind of see, you know, some people holding to the old beliefs. You see some people like looking around at the changes going on, and you know, they did willingly change, you know, change to those belief systems. Something like deprivation. So in times of natural disasters, people get uber religious, you know, and that's not just, you know, and once again, that's across the board. It doesn't matter what their religion is, you know, in times of duress, that's kind of one of the first things that we seem to go to as human beings. And, you know, you hear those stories too, people who aren't religious at all, but the minute they're put in that situation, they're like, I was praying to God, right? And some of these religious revitalizations, like I just said, you know, so we know that many of the Native American groups, many of the South Native American groups, they kind of had these nativistic movements where it's like you know, they rejected that contact belief systems. That's what we'll say, that Christianity, and you know, they wanted to really stay strong in their indigenous traditions. The Lakota are really big about sticking to you know, their traditions. These cargo cults, if you guys have never heard of those are pretty cool. So basically, let's see, I think it was during World War II is when they started. During World War II, especially in the Pacific, you know, where there were a lot of battles taking place between Japan and the United States, had a lot of air battles. You know, there were a lot of little islands out there, so there were people that cultures that had no clue there was a world war going on. And you know, all of a sudden there are these planes and these bombs, and you know, I'm sure probably people getting killed. And so, you know, they're appeasing to their supernatural forces in every way, shape, and form that they can think of, and you know, nothing's working. And you know, things are getting really stressful. In long story short, it's kind of like they run out of food, or no, I know what happens. I think it was like it was a mistake. Like one of these, like the MREs and stuff that they sent to the soldiers, that they would put in these big like crates, you know, that the airplanes and helicopters would use. And so they could just kind of, you know, parachute them down to where somebody was, and they would have their rations, right? Well, it's like some of those got displaced and ended up on these islands with these cultures that lived there. And they kind of, you know, chalked it up to being these supranational forces. And the reason we say that is because they saw the planes. And so they started, you know, they kind of became dependent on getting this cargo, as we could call it, because it's like somehow in the story, it's like, sorry to sound confused, guys, but the way the story goes is you know, they dropped him off, and then they kept dropping him off, and then they stopped. I guess it was the end of the war. The war stopped, and so they weren't getting these shipments anymore, and they started making these like planes, you know, like these planes kind of appease to the gods. It's like, oh, if we make the plane, it'll come back and bring us that stuff, that great stuff back, right? And so like anthropologists found out, and I think then for a while there they started shipping them in stuff again, and then I can't really remember where it went from there, but it was kind of interesting phenomenon. And there's this great old movie from the 70s called The Gods Must Be Crazy, and it kind of looks at that idea of cultural contact and what happens when people's belief systems get shaken up. It's actually, it's one of those like satire, so it's a farce. And for the 70s. I guess it was kind of hard, to get, you can't get too political in a movie, right? So they kind of took this kind of funny spin on what happens to the Bushmen, the Sand People, but it's kind of all along these kind of same ideas here. And then, of course, just like I said, we see, even down to the individual level and organized religions like Christianity, that we see differences and we see people breaking away and forming their own types of groups. And then we have the modest movements with some of those revitalization movements in the Muslim world. I would say that would probably be more of some of those fundamental, fanatical type groups that we hear about. And I'm sure, some of you guys, if you've been in the Gulf War, had experiences with. And then we have this millenary movements, and that's pretty much steeped in Christianity. It has something to do with, from my understanding, has something to do with like revelations, and so like the apocalypse and rapture, or some idea about like Satan's going to rule the world for 1,000 years, and then Jesus is going to come and rule the world for 1,000 years, and that great big battle there. And so I think a lot of them, like I said, though, it's kind of that rapture where they kind of have the idea that, they're all those people in their group are the only ones that are going on to a better place, and all the rest of us are going to, burn in eternal fire. So that's kind of yeah, I tried to look more into that, and it was kind of like making my brain hurt. And so what all this so in wrapping it up, as much as we have these organized religions, and we know that religion is deeply rooted in history, psychology, our social structures, political, economic structures, and rooted deep within our ancient past. So it's in our DNA. We still see, as much as we have that continuity, we still see that religion is very dynamic. And the way that, we see changing now is we don't see so much of that kind of fundamental mentalism like we have had in the past. It's more, people are a little more open and a little more eclectic in their beliefs. And so we see a lot of cross pollinating, and we see this mixing of beliefs. I'm trying to think what is it. Agnostic, I think, is probably a good word for it, to where you don't particularly subscribe to really one belief system. It's like you have the idea of the supernatural kind of divine force, but it kind of, I don't know, it's kind of rooted more in like mysticism, which that's a lecture for another day too. And so what we see with this kind of mixing of beliefs and this changing of religion is we see on that political social side that it's causing these world leaders and these religious leaders to kind of have to change with it too. So just off the top of my head, thinking about the Catholic Church, think of the hold that it has had on Europe for as long as it did, and I do think there's a little bit of revitalization there. In fact, Catholicism, I think, in the past 60 years has seen a revitalization. I can't remember if we passed that slide already, but I would suspect a lot of that has to do with the popes. Absolutely, with the popes, and how these past couple that we've had have kind of broken from more of that rigid traditional Vatican Roman Catholic, staunch ideas and stuff. Look at the Pope now. I can't even think of what his name is, but he's come out and he's accepting of the LGBTQ community. He's even said something about if there are really aliens, then God probably made them, and they would welcome them into the Vatican. And just I laugh because it's like he does say a lot of things that are just radical as far as looking at the traditional kind of what the Pope did, and really, if you start digging into that history, you'll see that popes have done way more nefarious stuff to people, but good stuff. Craziness there too, right? And so, oops, I'm going way too long. I think that's it, guys. Oh, and oh, there we go. So just what I just told you about the Roman Catholicism there, and what we see is we see major shifts in the global south. So pretty much south of the equator, where coincidentally Catholicism has had the main control because of the Spanish conquistadors. We see that changing, and you know, once again, so much cultural diversity down there that I don't want to lump it all together. In some ways, you see those changes for the good, especially places like Brazil, Peru. They have a real steep Catholic tradition. And then probably in other places where people are coming more back to their indigenous beliefs, probably some of those areas where they have a lot of crime, a lot of drug problems, a lot of just really nefarious dictators getting into power. Religion is mixed in to all of that, and then it all comes down to trying to find those solutions for how those groups of people move forward in positive and productive ways. And then when it comes to that idea of fundamentalism, I think I've already kind of mentioned this too. We tend to think of that, especially since 9/11. We have definitely had that association that fundamentalism only exists in other religions, mainly Islam. And, we see that fundamentalism can exist in any culture, in any religion. And the only reason I point that out is because, that saying, it's very much a pointing fingers thing. And you know what they say, when you point a finger, you got three more pointing back at you. And, we could put that in a Christian metaphor, is that, who is without sin, throw the first stone type thing. So, fundamentalism, extremism, I would say without a doubt exists. And wherever you find a group of people on this planet, there's some kind of fundamental extremism associated there. And that could be on the really good side or the really bad side. And then with technology has really changed the way that we go about viewing religion, especially now with COVID. That really changed a lot of the way churches were set up. And big part of the ecclesiastical cults is that regular communion with each other, right? And so the COVID really kind of put a nail in I should say, kind of mess that up. We'll just put it that way, right? And so many places have turned to the online churches. And then even before COVID, this idea of cyber churches and having virtual congregations was already starting to get some fire. You know that Oprah has her own church. Yeah, it's true, guys. She's probably, I think that's been established since let's see, since yeah, about the early 2000s. I was thinking the last time I taught my anthropology and my introduction to archaeology class was probably about 14, 15, 014, 015, 13, 14, 15, something like that. And Oprah had already had her church established. Maybe it was in 2010 is when that happened. But so we see that, and so it's very interesting to see COVID's already made some of those changes, and where we're going with that. I believe this is our last slide. So last but not least, oh, sorry, guys. So this idea of religious nationalism, and this is just, it's another form of fundamental extremism, but what it is doing is it's taking those belief systems and it's intertwining them so much with the social system. And that social system, it's made up of us, the social groups. It's made up of the leaders, political groups, and it's made up of our just economics. How we go about managing all those other two parts, and resources in a nutshell. There, right? So with this idea of religious nationalism, you're merging them. And so once again, we do see that a lot with fundamental fundamental Islam, the whole jihad movement, and kind of Arab socialism, the whole Arab Spring there that was back in the early 2000s. A lot of that was this idea of just nationalism. So nationalism is having pride in your culture. We call it patriotism, but they're really the same thing. Where we see once again extremes with nationalism. You see it with Mussolini when he started fascism in Italy, and then Hitler, emulated. And I can't even remember the dude's name, but there's actually a fascist movement in Spain. And that guy who was the dictator in Spain, he did some really horrible things. He was kind of like Stalin, as in just wiping out people. And then we have Tojo over in Japan with their whole kind of fascist nationalist movement. So, this idea of nationalism is pride in one culture. It goes to the extreme because, everybody should be proud of where they came from. Everybody should be proud of who they are, their history, right? That's a big part of when you talk to indigenous culture. So I'll use the Lakota again, since I worked with them a lot, so I feel confident in speaking about some of the stuff that they shared with me. That their nationalism is their Lakota belief. They strongly want to adhere to their belief systems, adhere to their cultural traditions, and they don't want the American government coming in and telling them that they can't do that. Just like, once again, our little Baptist church on 10th Street here, they don't want a government coming in and telling them what to do. And so we see, to kind of mediate that, we combine them and say, okay, well, let's then build the government based on these ideas. And that creates a whole system of problems too, because then whose culture is better than the other. That's where nationalism turns extreme, is when it's okay to be proud of who you are and your culture, but when you get to the point that you're like, my culture is so much better than everybody else that I'm going to harm everybody else and kill everybody else to prove that I'm right and I'm the best. That's where we see these ideas of nationalism rearing their ugly head. This is where we see religious extremism rearing its ugly head. And I hate to end on that note because that's a little negative, but I don't know what the answer is to helping with that. All I know is that extremes may exist in human nature, but I guess I'm a little more along the idea of Einstein and maybe psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, where are people like religious figures like the Dalai Lama. I try to see more of the good in people. I realize, it's not all unicorns and rainbows, and, we can't all be Pollyanna. Bad things are going to happen. Bad people exist. But I definitely don't let those bad people dictate my life or, try to prevent me from doing the good things that I want to do in society. And all I could say is that I hope that, that will eventually win out, right? There we go. The whole reason we have religion to begin with, because we don't know what life and death are, and we have these ideas of good and evil. And I choose to believe that good is always going to win. How I've defined that good, that gets a little tricky, because we definitely have our own ways of doing that. But all right, guys, that is all. As always, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thanks. Bye.